So let's look at some Vue directives. Now, directives are the things, if we go and look at the documentation, that provide things like conditional rendering, list rendering, which essentially is looping, and other kinds of structural things that happen in the HTML based on the data, right? So the first thing that we did was a simple substitution. We substituted this string name with the double curly braces around it, sometimes referred to as mustaches, with the name value from the data property of the Vue object. Sounds like a mouthful, but you can see what it does by looking at the code here. So what we're going to do here is we're going to mix it up a little bit, and we're going to make it render a list. So let's say that my data, and I'm going to go ahead and paste this so you don't have to watch me type it. Let's say that my data was a list. In this case, I've got a list of universities and the cities in which they reside. And instead of names handler, I'm just going to call it V for now. So now my data is a list, and what I want is a list to render up here. So what I'm going to do, of course, is, when one creates a list, often one creates an unordered list element in the HTML. And inside my unordered list, I'm going to put a bunch of list items, right? And here is where I'm going to have, let's say, name is in city, right? This is incomplete, but it gives you an idea of what the output is going to be for each list item. So what I need is a way to tell this list item, I want you to repeat based on the values in university list. And the way we do that is with the for directive. And so in standard Vue fashion, the syntax is v-for equals, and then in quotes, I'm going to put a very special expression that's kind of like a for loop expression. It's something you've seen in JavaScript before. In this case, I'm going to say school in university list. So what this means is that for each item in the data university list property, I'm going to repeat this list item, this tag li, once for each item in the university list, and inside the loop I'm going to call it school. So school is the variable name it's going to have inside the list for each element, which means name is really going to be school.name, and city is going to be school.city, right? And having done this, if I go ahead and run it, sure enough, I get my 4 list items, one for each item in the university list. Now, again, you might say, how's this different from doing a for loop and just, printing out inner HTML or whatever each time? Let me show you what happens. If we open up the debugger, we can actually see, let's go down to the result frame, we can actually see how this HTML will change dynamically as the JavaScript data structure changes. So let's look at what happens if we try to change the contents of this list dynamically. So here I have the result frame selected in my debugger, and I've also got the loading set to bottom of body, because remember, if I had on load set here, then none of these variables, like v, would be accessible to me because they'd be enclosed by the onload function and they'd be out of scope. So if I type v here now, I actually get my Vue object, and if I type v.university list, I can see my 4 items. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add one item to that list. So when I press the enter key, I'm going to add the city of Providence and Brown University, and watch what happens in the HTML output pane when I hit return. It shows up Brown is in Providence, right? So that's the beauty of Vue and other kinds of reactive frameworks like this, but particularly Vue in this case, is if I change the data, the HTML changes to match. And we'll see as we get to forms and event binding, the same can happen in reverse. So that takes care of, let me close my debugger now, the looping case. So now let's look at the conditional case. Let's say I would like some additional content to appear on this line based on another property. Let's say I have a Boolean property in my data called isBest, and for Harvard I have that set to true, and for the others I don't have it set at all. And maybe I want to add something here, and what I can do is add a span, and I can say is the best, right? But I only want this span to appear if isBest is true. And this is where the VIF comes into play, and my test condition is school.isBest. And basically it's just testing for truthiness, right? In these cases, isBest is going to be undefined, and of course that will evaluate as if it's false. If I go ahead and run this, oh, what happened here? This very strange artifact of playing around in JS Fiddle when you mix up your view settings. All right. There we go. And it says Harvard and is in Cambridge and is the best, right? And of course this if condition, there's actually a way to do an else. I can do v-else here, and what you'll see is that's what renders when the isBest value is falsy. So we now have conditionals, we have looping. It's all tied live to the data that's in our data structures. And perhaps the last thing that might be interesting would be to be able to change the style or the classes based on things that appear in the data. Let's say I had a class called class best school. I'll just call it best school. And it's going to be bold. If best school is true. So the way I would bind a class is going up here. Let's say I just want the school name to appear in bold if that school happens to be the best school. And what I would do here is I would say vbind :class, right? So it's the class attribute that I am binding to a property, an expression that we're going to evaluate. And basically here I'm going to give it an object literal. And the object literal is going to have two values. One is the class name I want to use, and the second one is, it's not two values, it's a name value pair. It's going to be the class name I want to use and the condition I want to test, which is school is best, right? So I'm binding the class attribute of the HTML span. It's going to use the best school class if school.isBest is true. And if I hit run, and what did I do wrong? Anybody see it? Let's go look at the at the documentation and see what I did wrong. Where is my class and style bindings? It's vbind :class, and then it's an object literal with the active class. Okay, so let's go take a look at my JS Fiddle and see what I did. Vbind class equals best school, school.isBest, and vbind. That's a dash. He will do this just like I did. Now let's run it, and sure enough, Harvard is in bold, just as we expected. So this is just scratching the surface of what's possible when you start diving into what the things that are here in Vue. And really you just should go to the documentation, because you're going to see, for example, with classes, very often you have multiple class names on an element. That stuff can all be handled by Vue. The documentation can take you deeper into where we've just scratched the surface.